A horror movie that's not a zombie flick or a possession story. What a relief. I got to see Boys from County Hell as part of the Nightstream Virtual Film Festival. Is it worth checking out when it becomes available? A group of workers must survive the night when they accidentally awaken an ancient Irish vampire. This is a horror comedy that's the feature-length version of a short film from 2013. The writer and director are still the same person, so really this is just an adaptation of their short film made longer. The small town where the group lives is apparently known as the birthplace and inspiration for Bram Stoker's Dracula. It's said that the very first bloodsucker on Earth lived in that town and is now buried in a field under a stone cairn. City expansion is happening, and then through an accident, the cairn is disturbed, and then weird things begin to happen. Like I said, this is a horror comedy, and it leans maybe a little bit more towards the comedic side than the horror, but not much. The acting is fun in this. We have a group of young adults who basically, they go to work for a little bit, they play some football, then they go and drink heavily at the pub, and then they repeat. They all have pretty good chemistry together, and they're fairly likable and enjoyable. While the story's a little bit engaging, it feels generic. And while generic is not always just a bad thing, because you can have a generic story that is told really well, in this, the content doesn't also feel fresh. So the combo between not too fresh and generic, it's kind of a bummer. Now, there isn't really anything special about the characters themselves or their relationships. They're pretty static, and even through the course of the film, we don't experience much growth from them, even though they're given the opportunity for a lot of growth. Now, that's not to say that nobody grows ever, because there are little bits here and there, but for the most part, they're just a bunch of static characters put into a situation and they react. And there's not a lot of development on the characters either. I mean, we're given enough context and background on them to understand the interactions that are going on between the characters, especially because of a situation, but I don't feel too connected to them. So if something bad were to happen to a character, I don't know, I'm not really shedding a tear, or I'm not cheering either, because there's not a group of people or a person, a character in this where I'm like either really strongly for or strongly against. I really like how the film reevaluates how to kill a vampire. It pokes fun at what's been written in books and shown in movies as the way to end a bloodsucker. Now, one thing that is an absolute standout in this film is the use of practical effects. I mean, from the creatures to the blood, the gore, the violence, all of these things are done spectacularly. I mean, this is the one thing that is absolutely awesome in the film. And I think they need to be applauded because they really did a great job on this, especially for taking what is probably a fairly low budget film and doing some really creative and great effects that are done practically. They're not reliant on CGI to do any of this, and so it really adds some great realism, and it also harkens back just a tiny bit to maybe like American Werewolf in London, where, I mean, I know that some of those graphics are cheesy, but they're awesome as well. Now, I didn't feel a lot of anxiety from the story. There should be a building tension because it's a horror. And just because it has some comedic elements in there, that shouldn't break that tension that should be building. And that's not to say that the comedy in this is like laugh out loud. It wasn't. I mean, I chuckled some. There were some opportunities to build up fear, but I think that they rushed those, that they didn't let that mounting tension just rise and to develop some and to breathe just a little bit so that then I feel this sense of impending doom or at least terror. I think they should have held off on showing some things. They would have built an air of mystery around it to really build up that tension, build up that anxiety, build up what mounts to fear, or at least some chills. Overall, this isn't a bad movie or story. It just isn't very compelling or memorable. I mean, it's fun while you watch it, but it's not something that's going to stick with you after you turn it off. It's 90 minutes long and it's a great length. I wasn't bored with it, and the pace, if anything, did feel a little bit rushed. And I talked about that some with the mounting tension and just how they didn't build any of that anticipation for terror. But also, if they had really slowed things way down, I think that the movie would have been boring because there wasn't a lot to do in this. I mean, we have characters put into a situation and then they react, and that's what we watch. But I do think that there is still that opportunity to put the characters in a situation, have the story be moving along at the quick pace that it was, but still hold back enough so that I do get some mystery in there, some rising bit of fear or chills or just that little tingling on the back of your neck, just a little bit, to let me know that, you know what, this is kind of a horror and not just kind of a middling comedy. Now, I'm not sure when this is going to hit streaming platforms or video on demand, but really I would wait until it's either a very cheap rental or it hits Amazon Prime or Netflix. There's no sex or nudity, a lot of profanity, and a ton of bloody violence. I give Boys from County Hell 2.5 out of 5 couches. What's a good horror comedy that you enjoy? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this review, please give it a like. Also, don't forget to share and subscribe. I'm Chris. This is Movies and Munchies. Thanks for catching with me.